So I grew up in America, typical American boy. Uh, it was back in the 60s. I was in third, fourth, and fifth grade at Strawberry Park Elementary in San Jose, California. And there were two kinds of bullies. There were the bullies, who I would say would be exemplified by a guy who was named Michael Barr. And he was fat, and he was bigger than everybody else. And he used to just pick on people. Really, when you get right down to it, he was trying to make friends. He just didn't know any other way to do it. And honestly, I'd take him over the other bullies. And the other bullies were numerous. And so at Strawberry Park Elementary, I lived in some apartments behind a shopping center called Shopwell on Saratoga Boulevard. Now it's some Japanese thing. But it was kind of like your Kroger's or your Myers or something like that, except for maybe a little bit smaller. Anyway, that's nothing to do with anything. Anyway, my point is that I lived in an apartment. And all the these other bullies that I'm talking about, they all had houses. Their parents, for whatever reason, as opposed to my dad, my mom and dad, had managed to get into a house. Now, we'd always had to live in apartments because I guess that my dad or my mom couldn't qualify for a house. But, there's a significance, there's some kind of point of significance there, that I lived in an apartment and they lived in a house. All these guys, I mean, and not all of them, not every single one of them were bullies, but I think they all did think they were better than me. And there were a couple who weren't as bad as the other ones. But the other ones, like, there was a guy named Greg, and I don't know, I can't remember their names as well. I remember Chris Brokaw. I mean, this kid used to call me out after school every other day. Tell me he'd be waiting for me outside the gate. And as soon as you step out the gate, you're in their neighborhood. I mean, that's where they lived, right? They all had houses all around the school. And by the way, I don't remember there being one black person in the whole school. You would see them, and Hispanics, at times, if you went other places. But generally speaking, my parents had gotten me into a place where it was all white. All white. So I was experiencing a type of bullying that happens in an all-white situation. It wasn't the kind of bullying that you would experience, like when I later ended up in, they finally had desegregation and they bussed people into our school, and it was about, I don't know how many black people were there. But that was at Woodside High School in Redwood City later on. So these were a special class of bully, right? I mean, they were they were typical of what you were going to experience in the business world, you know, once you got a job and stuff. They would be the people, well, mostly, for the most part, you would never see. Because you would be managed by their employees. At least that's my experience. They maintain a separation through the structure, the business structure. But probably the main thing I remember about they were just really egotistical and really arrogant. And so I remember I had two friends, and they weren't nearly as bad as the other ones. The other ones, I know they hit me. I remember the one called Greg giving me a bloody nose one day, and I never did anything to them. I beat up Michael Barr one time because he picked a lot of fights with me, and one time I just happened to get the better of him. And my mom could see me. I had him down on the ground, and she went and got my dad and told him to go down and break us up. And my dad said, well, you know, that kid's beaten up Martin a lot, and I'm just going to let him go for a little while. Michael ended up getting put outside of the class because he couldn't keep his mouth shut one day, and banging so hard on the back window of the door. The door had a window with steel wires running through it that he shattered it, and they sent him off to a special school. Now, they never handled any of the other kids that way. And I'll get to the story in a second. The story is the important part of this. The other kids used to beat up on me. I remember one time we were using the girls' bathroom to set up a haunted house for Halloween. And we were all there on a Saturday, all working on this haunted house thing. And this one guy, this Jeff or Kevin, or maybe his name was Victor. Anyway, I don't remember. But I remember what an asshole he was all the time. And that day, I mean, back then I didn't think of them as assholes. I didn't know better. But that day, we were in the girls' bathroom doing stuff, and some people had written stuff on the walls, and he started nagging me because the word fuck was on the wall, you know, the F word. And he started, you know, there were girls in there and a couple other guys, and he started badgering me about what the word fuck meant. And I knew, but I didn't want to say it out loud in front of girls and everything. I didn't want to talk about it in front of them. And finally, he just punched me in the stomach real hard. And I was he knocked the breath out of me, and I managed to say fuck you to him. I was like, fuck you. You know, and this was a daily occurrence, right? These particular group of kids, like I say, their parents owned houses around the school, and they were all a bunch of pushy, arrogant, egotistical little fucks, you know. Oh, but they would be considered to be just dominant, right? They're alpha males. To this day, I think I get disgusted by men who call themselves alpha males. Like they, you know, and that's it. They're dicks. That's what they are. That's why we call them dicks and pricks and everything else, is because, if you want to call yourself an alpha male, well, that's all you're good for, is breeding. And by the way, any cat or dog can do that as well. All animals are capable of breeding, and most of them do. So, this guy punches me in the stomach, and then he goes and runs to the principal and tells them that I said fuck you to him. No. I'm like, holy shit. So they dragged me into the principal's office, and the principal asked me if I said fuck you, and I don't care if he knows, so I just say, yeah, I said it to him. And they bring this new psychologist in, and she says, so you think it's okay to say fuck you to somebody? And I was like, I didn't say anything. I was amazed. And she says, well, why don't you say fuck you to me? This is a hired psychologist for the school. Some girl. She couldn't have been more than about 20, 25 years old. And she just went on and on. Well, go ahead, say fuck you to me. Can you imagine? I'm like a 8-year-old kid or something. And she's bullying me. I'm being bullied by the class, by the school psychiatrist. So, these stories, they typify white, what's it called? Where they think they, like, everybody owes them something, like they're better than everybody else. You know the word anyway. I'll think of it. But here's the story that I'm really here to tell. And this is probably typical of every classroom in America. And so one day I'm in 4th grade and we have Mrs. Maynard. And she says, okay, we're going to have an extracurricular class after school. And anybody who wants to attend can attend. It's called leadership. And anybody who'd like to learn about how to lead people, how to, run things, come up here and sign this piece of paper. And all the little thugs, including one of my friends, Carl Gardino, just run up there. You could see how excited they were. And I was like looking at Carl going, you gotta be kidding. So you're one of them, huh? Well, now Carl is one of the richest men in the Bay Area. He runs the, what's it called? I was trying to call him and talk to him because I wanted to find out if he still knows my friends from high school or from elementary school. But I was amazed that he would join in on this stuff. So he's head of one of, and I know the guy who started the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. It was Bill Hewlett, and I used to spend weekends over at his house sometimes because he married, what was his name? Jeff. He married his mother, and so we had free run of this massive mansion that he owned in not Portola Valley, Palo Alto. So, I mean, here's one of my friends from then who, and of course, you're rewarded. In fact, if you're willing to do the dirty work, like my dad was, then you do eventually get to own a house and be one of the privileged, white privilege, that would be one of the words I wasn't able to think of, but the other one is where you have expectations because you're part of the group. So, my dad did end up finally making it. But how did he do it? He ended up basically being, well, to be exact, he was remember that movie, Mission Impossible? Remember how they were trying to keep the knock list out of the hands of the enemy, whoever they were? Well, my dad was a knock. He was in not official capacity. In Lebanon, he was, and he had the creds to get this because he rose to the highest level in the military you can get to as a farm boy, which is sergeant major or something like that. You can't be enlisted. Can't become officers like lieutenants and not corporals, lieutenants and majors and things like that. So, and he had top clearance, secret level clearance, because he handled nuclear weapons, because he was on a missile site where they had nuclear capability against anything coming in over the Pacific Ocean, planes, whatever. As a matter of fact, they almost launched a nuclear weapon at an unidentified object one day, and maybe I'll tell you that story sometime. But so basically, my dad ended up, whether it was by planned or not, he ended up in Lebanon. And while he was there, for sure while he was there, if not beforehand, I mean, I have my suspicions that it was all set up all along, that he was military intelligence from the very beginning. But for sure he became military intelligence in Lebanon, and for sure he helped, if not in the assassination attempts that I witnessed on Yasser Arafat, but for sure my dad helped in what eventually became they got the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, out of Beirut, right? For sure. And then Dad ended up in Dammam, Al-Khobar, Saudi Arabia, where he worked with the Bin Ladens to raise the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, fight the Russians, get the Russians out. And then he ended up in Indonesia, where I even witnessed Uh, okay, so my point is that my dad was different. Their dads, these bullies I'm talking about, their dads, oh, I just remember the word. Their dads were entitled, and their kids felt entitled. And, the main point of this is why? Why do all these parents allow their kids? They must encourage their kids to be assholes to everybody else. And I'm sure they're assholes to each other too, but on a kind of friendly basis. You know what I mean? Because they're all part of the same group. And they all know that as part of that group, they're going to have houses. They're going to have wives. They're going to have kids. They're going to have a boat or whatever they want to do on the weekends and all that shit. It's white entitlement. And if you think that that's bullshit, well, you didn't live my life. Because I'm an eyewitness to it, and I know it's not bullshit. I know that's exactly what happens in this world. And yes, these people are very vicious, and anybody who shows any sign of weakness gets bullied. Or anybody who is weaker, like me, living in an apartment. After my dad went on to be their slave, to do their dirty work, oh, they all treated me differently. Once they knew who my dad was, like later in life, they'd tell me how great I am because they knew about my dad. My dad would even talk to other people about this stuff kind of vaguely. Because when you're doing intelligence work, you're sworn to secrecy, and besides that, you would never tell. Because you'd create a... But that didn't stop him from doing whatever he could to make a reputation for himself amongst the white communities that he would eventually end up in. He made it very clear that we were in Lebanon. He made it very clear that we were in Saudi Arabia and Indonesia. And then he would say just enough. It's just like he never ever told me what he was up to. But after years of badgering, he said, well, where do you think those reports I used to write for Singer sewing machines, where do you think they went? And after thinking about it for a long time, and I realized that, well, why was this one guy always hanging around? His name was Joe Oppenheim. He's a rich Jew from Boston. Well, I figured it out. I mean, he was always around, and he wasn't a friend. He was important to my dad. And he's the one who told me he'd send me to Harvard after I refused to go back to Oxford. He was my dad's handler. And as a Boston Jew, I'm sure he was very well connected with Israel. So, most of you out there don't have life experience to back up what you hear. You hear about Israel being got its nose in everything in the United States and trying to make it illegal for Americans to boycott Israel and things like that are ridiculous, right? But you don't have the life experience to back it up. So you can take it from me, because I do. I know how these things work. I know that if you're a farm boy in America, your way out of poverty and anonymity and all that kind of stuff is to join Blackwater. or another, what are they called? Anyway, these disgusting companies that are like extra legal and doing horrible things around the world. And that's what my dad did, except for he did it secretly. He didn't join one of those companies. He joined a front company, which was Singer Sewing Machines. And then he went and worked for Saudi Arabian, which was a front. It was all a front. My dad wasn't. He didn't have any kind of degree. He wasn't any kind of amazing businessman. He wasn't the type, because they give those jobs, CEOs and presidents of banks and stuff. They give those to the guys in my class that I was describing earlier. The other kind of bully. And honestly, I would much rather have to deal with a real bully like Michael Barr. Because once you sit down and talk with them, they don't really want to bully you anymore. They always wanted you as a friend in the first place. That's all they wanted. As a matter of fact, watch the movie Big Bully with Tom Arnold and what's his name? The little guy from, I think he was on Saturday Night Live. Anyway, they just want to be your friend, really. But these other guys, they want to dominate you and push you around because they get those kind of jobs. My dad was only given those jobs as cover to gather information for, like I said, I watched the Israelis just bomb and missile the shit out of this one building in an attempt to kill Yasser Arafat, and I wouldn't doubt it in the least if my dad had told me, yeah, I told him about that meeting, and that's how they almost killed him. He just happened to not go that day. Had something come up. Or somebody tipped him off. Who knows? Oh, the stories I could tell you about the Israeli airstrikes that I saw and the Israeli ground incursions the night they came in and murdered entire families of Palestinians in Beirut in retaliation for Munich, I guess. But it was pretty horrific, some of the stuff I've seen, and I talk about it in other pieces, and I can you can go back through my stuff. I'm going to repost a lot of old stories, but let's hear about how this worked out.
By all appearances, Ryan Senek is a happy, healthy 11-year-old girl. She loves her stuffed animal named
Wolfie,
dogs, and reading.
This is the kind of books I read.
But this was Ryan a mere 3 weeks ago, bruised and bullied.
She just popped out, said, "You're gonna fight me." I said, "I don't want to fight you."
A fellow 6th grader cornered Ryan in the Turrentine Middle School locker room while others stood by, taking videos.
Started kicking me, punching me, stomping me, hitting me in the front, back, in the back of my head, my ribs, all over my back.
The proof in the pictures taken at the doctor after the attack.
11-year-olds planned an attack on another 11-year-old, and it's scary.
Mom Carly says she got a concussion, but it could have been worse.
Ryan is epileptic, so this could have been a deadly thing. She did hit her right in her frontal lobe, which is where Ryan's epilepsy is. I'm very lucky that I'm not planning my child's funeral instead of sitting here.
The ordeal too emotional for Ryan to talk about at times.
Are you okay? You don't want to talk anymore. Okay.
Carly says Ryan has even been diagnosed with PTSD.
I don't know how to protect her. I don't know what to do to help her.
So, Yeah, it makes me think of me having to deal with all those kids all the time. These are white situations too, you know? I mean, these are, because America is still largely segregated when you go to schools outside of the cities. When you get into these smaller towns, the towns are segregated. So we're talking about a white thing. And people don't understand that who live in the cities. They think that everywhere in the United States now is, you know, you deal with black people. Well, before my dad died, he said, you know, Berry County, which is where my ancestral farm is, which I've had to sell because I don't have enough money. But anyway, he said, we were talking about race, because my dad used to always peddle this bullshit about how at his house there was a black family that lived somewhere around there, and that they used to have them over for dinner, and he can remember them sitting around the dinner table talking like normal people. And that's how he would put things, like that was somehow made him not a racist, if it was even true. Because before he died, you know, we were talking about, I think I said to him, you know, I mean, you know that, you know, you're a racist, really. And he said, well, you know, he said, did you know that there wasn't that there isn't a black family in Berry County, Missouri, which is where the farm is? And I said, well, how is that right? And what are you trying to say, that that's okay, or that that's good somehow? And I said, why is that a good thing? And he says, well, what's there for them to do there? I mean, the mindset is so fucking evil, right? That you can't even put your mind around it. You can't wrap your head around it. I mean, I can't even, to this day, I can't even understand where that kind of, well, we don't want black people around just because they're black, and there's no place for them in our world, except for maybe to, you know, hand us a bag full of hamburgers or something. I mean, that's where that's coming from, right? And this is the mindset that these people, and I don't know Carl Gardino, I'm not using him as an example, because he was the nice guy. I mean, I've got pictures of him at my birthday parties. And even the asshole Chris Brokaw, he was at my birthday party, but it was like I could not invite him because I knew them all so well. Not the other bullies. I didn't really know them that well, and I didn't invite them to my parties. But for 3 years, I did invite Chris Brokaw and Carl Gardino, Mark Wiseman. And these were guys that I could get along with. And I'm glad that Carl's done well, but he's a snob now. He doesn't even return my phone calls. All I wanted, he probably thinks I'm looking for a job, you know, and he doesn't realize that the guy who created the Silicon Valley Leadership Council, our group, I mean, I had every opportunity to be a kiss ass like him and go far. Matter of fact, I could have probably. I'm certainly smarter than they are. I just shun the whole thing. You know, it's all so good old boy, kind of members only. Look at this, members only. yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much what this special form of bullying was all about. Pretty disgusting stuff, huh? Jesus, they beat her up pretty bad. Okay. I think that pretty much covers it. Thank you for listening. Hopefully I've gotten a little bit of... It doesn't get rid of the anger. It just makes you more angry. Really is what it does. So I guess that's probably why I avoid it. But I do feel like I should speak out, about bullying and about the whole environment. Because it's that whole environment, this alpha male environment, that leads to this kind of shit. And obviously it happens amongst the girls too, which is how we have Republican women, right? I mean, women who are for the subjugation of women. Amazing. Amazing. And people say to me, well, what are you criticizing? Sometimes they'll say that I'm criticizing women. And they'll say, do you have something against women? Like I have something against strong, liberal, not liberal, but, honest, good women. I'll say no. Just women like Ann Coulter or, Michelle Bachmann. And I don't even blame them. It's this horrible system that we've grown up in. We've all grown up in it. And at the same time, because I'm a man, I love women who are women. Female. That's what men love, right? Men fall in love with women. Generally speaking, we don't fall in love with the, women who look like a Russian bear or something. We're in love with the feminine qualities, even in a big, ugly, hairy woman. What little feminine is in them, we're very attracted to. I mean, that's the only reason that they end up getting pregnant, right? And I know that sounds a little sexist, but I am a man, and you can't take that away from me. And I'm not going to beat myself up over it. Anyway, that's something for another show entirely. But the point is that there are women out there who they create this situation. Obviously, she was in a locker room, so she was in a locker room full of girls. So, don't kill the messenger. I'm pointing out that this propagandization, this brainwashing, that ends up in little girls beating the hell out of another little girl, right? And who knows, maybe she said she liked Bernie Sanders or something. She doesn't seem like a typical right-wing little girl. And maybe all the other little girls are brought up to hate anybody like that. So, well, you end up paying the price either way, even before you understand what it is to be a good person and to care about the people around you. And then that brings out the anger in the people who they don't like you caring about what they consider their enemies, right? And that's what it's all about. You know, it's people being bullied by these people because they dare to care.